Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take on complex, often confusing topics and really try to provide you with the essential, synthesized knowledge.
And today we're definitely diving into one of those.
We are. We're strapping on our analytical goggles and turning our attention to a therapy that is, well, it's often lumped in with everything from legitimate physical therapy to, let's be honest, outright quackery.
That's a good way to put it.
We're talking about low-level laser therapy.
It occupies a truly unique space in the medical world, and for our mission today, we're going to dive into the stack of sources to figure out what you, the listener, really need to know about this.
Right.
This treatment uses light to stimulate the body. We're going to look at its incredibly specific mechanism, its wide-ranging and sometimes controversial claims, and most importantly,
The reality.
the hard-nosed reality of the current scientific evidence, and of course the regulation around it.
Okay, let's unpack this. What exactly is this light therapy, and how are we defining its power level? Because when most people hear laser, they're thinking of something that cuts or cauterizes or burns.
Yeah.
This is the opposite, right?
Precisely. We're dealing with LLLT, which is commonly called cold laser therapy. For that very reason, it generates no destructive heat.
Okay, cold laser.
But the term the scientific community is now coalescing around, just to avoid all this confusion, is photobiomodulation,
Photobiomodulation.
or PBM for short. It's really the most descriptive name. It just means light
Thank
on
you.
influencing biological processes of biomodulation.
Right.
So PBM involves applying low-power lasers or even light-emitting diode LEDs to the body's surface. The light is specifically chosen to be absorbed by tissues without causing any thermal damage.
And the claim is what?
The proponents claim this stimulates healing, it can reduce inflammation, and it can relieve pain.
So the fundamental idea is that specific light at a specific power is triggering a biological reaction. That sounds less like a simple treatment and more like a photochemistry experiment happening inside the body.
That is the perfect way to frame it. It is
Sure.
entirely dependent on physics and chemistry working together in a very, very precise way.
Meaning, if you miss the mark.
If you miss the dosage, you miss the effect entirely.
I think the biggest hurdle for listeners accepting PBM as legitimate is understanding the engine room. How does light, without any heat, initiate these profound biological changes? It feels counterintuitive.
It does.
How does a specific wavelength of light actually kickstart our cellular machinery?
It's not magic, it's just the laws of physics operating at a cellular level.
Yeah.
It all begins with the most fundamental rule of photochemistry, which is the Grothus-Draper law.
Okay.
This law dictates that for a photochemical reaction to take place, light must be absorbed by a chemical substance.
So if it's not absorbed, nothing happens.
Nothing. It just passes right through, no reaction occurs.
So we need a specific light-sensitive receptor inside our cells. That's the target. What is that target in the context of photobiomodulation?
In the case of PBM, the crucial chemical substance that's absorbing the light is a respiratory enzyme called cytochrome C oxidase.
Cytochrome C oxidase, that sounds deeply important. And if my high school biology memory is serving me correctly, that's connected to the cellular power grid.
It is.
Where do we find it, and why is it the ideal target for light?
You are absolutely right. It is located inside the mitochondria, the literal powerhouses of the cell.
Okay.
And cytochrome C oxidase is the terminal enzyme in what's called the electron transport chain, which is this complex four-stage process that generates ATP.
Cellular energy.
Cellular energy, exactly. Now, here's the fascinating detail. The reason this enzyme is the perfect target is that when a cell is under stress from an injury or inflammation or disease, its efficiency just drops.
And why does it drop?
It drops because a molecule called nitric oxide NO preferentially binds to the cytochrome C oxidase, and it temporarily blocks the site where oxygen should be binding.
So the nitric oxide is essentially hitting the cellular handbrake. The cell is metaphorically running low on power because its key enzyme is tied up.
Exactly. It's gumming up the works. So when you shine the PBM light, typically in the red to near infrared spectrum, the energy, the photons, are absorbed by that enzyme.
Right.
And that absorption provides just enough energy to cause a little conformational change, which effectively breaks the weak bond between the enzyme and the nitric oxide.
So the light knocks the nitric oxide off.
It does. The NO is released, oxygen rushes back in, and the electron transport chain suddenly becomes much more efficient, leading to an immediate boost in ATP production.
Here's where it gets really interesting. So this boost in ATP means the cell now has the energy reserves to accelerate repair, fight inflammation, and divide more effectively. It's like the light is acting as a rapid, localized detoxifier and supercharger all at once.
That's a great analogy. And that rapid release of nitric oxide also has secondary effects that help explain some of the clinical benefits we see.
Like such as?
Nitric oxide is a potent local vasodilator.
Meaning it widens blood vessels.
Right, so once it's released from the mitochondria, it helps increase localized blood flow. That brings more oxygen and more nutrients to the injured area, and it helps flush out metabolic waste products. This is key to explaining the anti-inflammatory and pain-reducing effects that are so often reported.
So the mechanism seems sound. It's physics and biochemistry. Light frees up the enzyme, boosts power with ATP, and increases local blood flow through the NO release. But if this is so straightforward, why is the dosage so critical? You said earlier that too little is useless, but too much can be actively harmful.
This is probably the single most critical concept in all of photobiomodulation, and is why standardized research has been so challenging. It is governed by a phenomenon known as hormesis.
Hormesis. Okay, that sounds like a technical term we need to immediately translate for the listener.
Right. Hormesis describes a biphasic dose-response relationship.
Meaning?
Meaning, the response to a stimulus is dependent on the amount given. In simpler terms, a low dose provides a stimulating beneficial effect, while a really high dose provides an inhibitory or even damaging effect.
So like coffee. Too little, no effect. The right amount gives you a huge boost. Too much, and you crash and feel terrible.
Precisely. We can even tie it back to an older, semi-discredited but still relevant concept known as the Arndt-Schultz law,
Okay.
which originally suggested that weak stimuli accelerate physiological activity, moderate stimuli inhibit it, and strong stimuli just abolish it. In PBM, the therapeutic window is astonishingly narrow. If you administer LLLT below the effective dose, the light isn't absorbed effectively enough to break that NO bond.
And nothing happens.
Nothing happens. The treatment is totally ineffective.
But if you go too high, if you overdo the energy dose, you risk causing damage. What's the mechanism of damage in that case?
The problem with excessive radiation is the overproduction of singlet oxygen and other highly reactive free radicals.
Reactive oxygen species, or ROS?
Exactly. And while a controlled, mild increase in ROS can sometimes be beneficial for cellular signaling, an excessive amount just overwhelms the cell's antioxidant defenses. This leads to oxidative stress, which can inhibit all the beneficial effects we just described, or worse, actually destroy healthy cells. Go from stimulating repair to causing cellular injury.
This means that PBM isn't just about owning a red light device. It's about having a device that delivers the right amount of energy at the right wavelength for the right amount of time, depending on how deep the target tissue is.
Absolutely.
I mean, that level of precision immediately clarifies why there's so much institutional skepticism, especially with how variable all the commercial devices are.
It makes protocol standardization extremely difficult. If one clinic uses a 10-joule dose and another uses a 1-joule dose for the exact same condition, they will inevitably get wildly different results.
And that makes a meta-analysis of all the research almost impossible.
It does. The dose needs to be strictly controlled by the clinician.
The idea of treating ailments with light feels ancient, but this modern, laser-based version is relatively new. Let's trace the historical path to PBM.
We have to start with the father of modern light therapy, the Faroese physician Niels Finsen. Back in the late 19th century, he was really pioneering the clinical use of specific wavelengths of light.
Right.
He famously used concentrated light from carbon arc lamps to treat skin conditions. His most noted success was using red light for smallpox lesions and phototherapy for a severe form of skin tuberculosis, lupus vulgaris.
And this wasn't just some interesting research on the side. He won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for this in 1903.
He did.
That is significant institutional validation for the power of light, even before the laser was invented.
It was a massive achievement. It highlighted that monochromatic light of a single color had powerful biological effects. However, as our sources note, the scientific evidence for some of his specific treatments is now lacking.
And then other things came along.
Exactly. Once antibiotics arrived in the mid-20th century and smallpox was eradicated, many of his phototherapies just became obsolete. But the principle that non-thermal light could induce healing, that was established.
The real breakthrough for low-level laser therapy, the PBM we're talking about today, couldn't happen until the invention of the laser itself in the early 1960s. And this is where that classic story of the accidental discovery comes in.
Yes, the key figure here is the Hungarian physician and surgeon Andrei Mister. He was working in Budapest shortly after the ruby and helium neon lasers were invented. Mister was trying to replicate an experiment that suggested high-power lasers could reduce tumors in mice.
So he was aiming for a destructive effect, but fate intervened with a faulty machine.
Exactly. The laser Mister was using was underpowered. It was defective. He applied this low-power ruby laser to the tumor sites, expecting a destructive outcome, but it failed completely to affect the tumors.
But he noticed something else.
He was meticulous. He had shaved the mice to conduct the experiment, and he noticed that the hair grew back significantly faster and more densely on the areas that had been exposed to the faulty, low-power laser compared to the untreated control group.
A scientific oops moment that changed everything. Instead of tissue destruction, he witnessed tissue biostimulation.
He did. The acceleration of a natural biological process. It was an incredible accident.
When did he publish that?
He published those initial results in 1967. Mester recognized the potential immediately. He continued his work, showing accelerated wound healing in mice using a helium neon laser, which operates at a different, highly effective wavelength. By the 1970s, he was applying this low-level laser light to treat human skin ulcers with reported success. He dedicated the rest of his career to this field.
You know, the accidental nature of the discovery really emphasizes those tight tolerances we talked about. If his laser hadn't been faulty, he would have likely seen a destructive effect or maybe no effect at all, and LLT might not even exist today.
The low power status was the absolute key to unlocking the therapeutic effect. It demonstrated that biphasic dose response in real time. But this accidental discovery quickly led to a terminology crisis. Mester originally called it laser biostimulation.
And the terminology has been a mess ever since, which, again, is probably why the public is so skeptical. But let's clarify the evolution of these names for a second.
So Mester's term morphed into low-level laser therapy, or LLLT. Then, researchers realized they could get similar photochemical results using non-laser light sources, specifically light-emitting diodes LEDs.
Which are cheaper and broader.
Right. So it became low-level light therapy. But to resolve the constant confusion over what low-level even means, it's subjective. It means nothing in a physics sense without quantifying the dose. The preferred term today is photobiomodulation.
PBM.
PBM, or photobiomodulation therapy.
It's just the most accurate term. PBM refers to the process, the light-induced change, whether that light comes from a laser, an LED, or some combination. So, for you listening, if you hear LLLT, cold laser, or red light therapy, just remember you're dealing with PBM, and the key is always the delivered dose, not the source.
Exactly right.
We've established the mechanism. Light hitting the cellular engine room, freeing up energy production, increasing blood flow. If the mechanism is that fundamental to how cells function, it makes sense that researchers would, well, point this light at a massive array of conditions.
They have.
Let's look at the primary applications where PBM is studied.
The traditional, most heavily researched area is in musculoskeletal and pain management. So LLLT or PBM is used for localized pain conditions like carpal tunnel syndrome, chronic low back pain, tendinopathy, and chronic joint disorders.
Like arthritis.
Notably osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis, yes.
And what does the clinical research consensus look like for these really common chronic pain conditions? We know the evidence is mixed, but why?
The mixed evidence comes directly from that lack of standardization we talked about. A Cochrane review on neck pain, for example. It often comes with warnings about a high risk of bias in the studies. The protocols were inconsistent, control groups were poorly chosen, that kind of thing.
But we are seeing better data for some things.
We are. We're seeing stronger data emerge for specific, targeted conditions. Recent systematic reviews suggest PBM can provide meaningful short to medium-term pain reduction in osteoarthritis. For conditions like plantar fasciitis, the evidence is growing to support short-term benefit, specifically around pain and function.
But if we look at more diffuse pain, like non-specific chronic low back pain or fibromyalgia, the evidence is still insufficient or highly questionable. It seems like the more targeted the pain, the better the result.
That seems to be the trend. And the most robust evidence, the gold standard where PBM really shines and is even covered by some insurers, is actually in prevention.
Now, this is a critical takeaway for the listener. PBM isn't just about curing old problems. Sometimes it's about stopping new ones from starting.
Absolutely. LLLT is highly effective for preventing and treating oral mucositis.
Okay, what is that?
It's a devastating side effect of chemotherapy where patients get these painful inflammation and ulcers in their mouth and throat. PBM, when it's applied correctly, significantly mitigates this suffering in patients undergoing stem cell transplants and chemotherapy.
And that's an area with solid evidence.
This is one of the few areas with high-quality, reproducible evidence, which is what leads to institutional acceptance.
Speaking of high-quality evidence, let's look at the commercial crossover points. The market for treating hair loss with PBM, specifically androgenetic alopecia, is huge. Is that just slick marketing, or is there real science behind it?
There is definite science there. PBM has been shown to increase hair density and growth in both men and women.
And what's the mechanism for that?
The proposed mechanism is that the light stimulates the dermal papilla cells, which prolongs the anagen, or the growth phase, of the hair follicle.
And how does it stack up against traditional treatments?
Recent reviews of numerous clinical trials suggest that PBM, when used consistently, can be comparable in efficacy to established therapies like topical minoxidil or oral finasteride, but without the systemic side effects.
But there's a caveat.
Always a caveat. The big one here is that long-term, large-scale randomized controlled trials are still necessary to fully integrate it into standard care. But the short-term evidence is undeniably promising.
And beyond hair, the application for chronic wound healing and even stimulating stem cells seems like a massive area ongoing research. I mean, if the mitochondria get a boost, the regenerative process should accelerate.
That's the theory, but the ability of the light to actually reach the target tissue is the great physical hurdle. And this brings us directly to the current hype application: brain stimulation or transcranial PBM.
Right, TPBM. The idea of using light to stimulate neurons for conditions like depression, trauma, or cognitive enhancement sounds revolutionary, but the skull is not transparent. We have to talk about penetration depth here.
We must. For PBM to work on the brain, the photons have to get through the scalp, the skull, and the meninges to reach the brain tissue underneath. This is where the physics of wavelength selection becomes paramount.
So not all light is created equal for this task.
Not at all. Visible red light, say 650 nanometers, and light from typical LEDs, they penetrate very, very poorly.
How poorly are we talking? We're fighting two major physical enemies here: absorption and scattering.
Correct. When light hits tissue, two things happen. It gets absorbed by things like melanin or hemoglobin, or it gets scattered. It just bounces off structures like collagen fibers. Red light is highly absorbed by hemoglobin in the blood, so very little of it even gets past the scalp.
So our sources say, what? It can only penetrate 0.0017 millimeters to maybe 5 millimeters?
At most. So for most consumer red light devices, the therapeutic effect is limited entirely to the skin and maybe some very superficial muscles.
Okay, so what's the solution for getting deeper?
To penetrate deeper tissues, especially the skull, researchers have to turn to near-infrared light, or NIR, typically 810 nanometers, 940, or 980.
And why is NIR the key?
Because it's much less absorbed by water, melanin, and hemoglobin. This increased transmission allows a tiny fraction of the light to reach deeper targets.
So if someone's trying to use PBM for something like cognitive function, they absolutely must be using a powerful, specific NIR laser, not just a red LED panel from the internet.
That is the minimum requirement for even attempting to reach the brain. And even with NIR, the amount of light that actually reaches 5 millimeters is dramatically reduced.
And then you run into the dosing problem again.
You do. The challenge becomes, if you boost the power of the NIR light to ensure enough penetration, you risk hitting that damaging high-dose side of the hormesis curve in the superficial layers. The delivery has to be sophisticated, using pulsed light or specific high-fluence, short-duration applications to ensure safety while still getting depth.
This complexity explains why PBM and neuromodulation is still considered highly experimental, despite some of the intriguing results being published. It's a frontier where you're fighting physics, optics, and biochemistry all at once.
It is. And just to close out the applications, these challenges extend to veterinary medicine. Lots of clinics use cold lasers on dogs and cats for chronic pain like arthritis.
Sure.
And while the desire to help is clear, the Evidence-Based Veterinary Medicine Association highlights that the research there is sparse and generally of low quality. So again, the mechanism is sound, but the clinical proof for routine use remains insufficient, whether you're talking about humans or animals.
This segment is essential for you, the listener. We've established that PBM has a strong theoretical mechanism and a handful of promising, very specific applications, like oral mucositis prevention and hair loss. But the market is just flooded with devices making wild claims.
It is.
We need to talk about the commercial reality and how to navigate the regulatory landscape.
Understanding the regulatory framework is paramount, especially in the U.S., where the FDA plays a major role. First, let's talk safety. PBM is generally considered safe when it's used correctly. Side effects are mild, maybe some temporary pain or skin irritation.
And eye protection.
Eye protection is often required, especially for the high-fluence laser devices. And as always, anyone considering home use for a skin condition must consult a dermatologist because skin type, race, and ethnicity all affect light absorption and therefore efficacy.
But the real danger isn't the device itself. It's the claims made about the device. We need to clearly define the regulatory difference between an FDA-cleared device and an FDA-approved device. This is the difference between legitimacy and fraud.
This is a critical distinction that trips up so many people. An FDA-cleared device, usually under the 500K pathway, means the manufacturer has proven their device is safe and substantially equivalent to a device already on the market.
A predicate device.
Right. It clears the device for market sale for a general purpose, like temporary pain relief.
Yeah.
But this clearance does not mean the FDA has rigorously tested and approved the manufacturer's specific claims of efficacy.
So a company can sell a laser device that's cleared for temporary minor pain relief, but if they start advertising that it cures cancer or diabetes, they have crossed a very serious line.
Exactly. FDA approval, which is the pre-market approval or PMA pathway, is reserved for high-risk devices or devices making really novel claims. Approval requires the manufacturer to submit rigorous, long-term, large-scale clinical trial data, proving the device is both safe and effective for a specific medical indication.
And LLT devices rarely go through that.
They rarely go through PMA for broad claims. The fraudulent companies deliberately conflate clearance with approval.
And that leads us to the spectacular and, frankly, terrifying example of the Q-laser PMA scandal. This serves as a massive warning sign for the listener.
It is the ultimate example of marketing fraud in this sector.
Sure.
In 2014, the FDA filed a complaint against Q-laser PMA because their devices, marketed primarily to home users, claimed to treat a staggering list of conditions.
How many?
Over 200 different diseases and disorders.
And these weren't just vague claims about pain relief.
No. They falsely claimed efficacy against the most severe, life-threatening conditions. We're talking cancer, HIV/AIDS, cardiac arrest, deafness, diabetes. It was an outright criminal attempt to profit off vulnerable people using unproven technology.
The government response had to be swift and severe. What happened to them?
The FDA secured a permanent injunction in 2015, which immediately halted the manufacture, marketing, and sale of the devices. But the legal fallout escalated. The owner, Robert Lytle, and several distributors were charged with criminal conspiracy to commit fraud.
And the outcome?
In 2018, Lytle was sentenced to 12 years in prison in order to pay millions in restitution. The severity of that sentence really reflects how dangerous these unsubstantiated claims are, especially when they lead people to abandon proven medical care.
That story is crucial. If a PBM device claims to treat more than a few specific, narrowly defined conditions like osteoarthritis pain or oral mucositis prevention, that is the biggest red flag imaginable.
It compels the listener to demand precision. And this history of fraudulent overstatement, combined with the methodological flaws in the broader research, is what keeps the institutional gates locked.
And that institutional skepticism is most clearly reflected in insurance reimbursement. If the science were overwhelming, coverage would be automatic, but the reality is the opposite.
It's the most telling indicator of where the evidence truly stands. Major payers remain deeply skeptical of LLOT for broad applications. For instance, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, and Aetna generally only provide coverage for that one single high-evidence application we talked about.
Oral mucositis prevention.
The prevention of oral mucositis in specific chemotherapy patients. That's it.
That's the one institutionalized area of trust.
Beyond that, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, currently does not provide coverage for LLT for any musculoskeletal or pain indication.
And what about others?
Perhaps the most explicit rejection comes from Cigna, one of the largest insurers. They list LLT as experimental, investigational, or unproven for any indication, with the occasional exception for mucositis prevention. And they support this position with detailed literature reviews that just demonstrate mixed results and a high risk of bias.
So what does this all mean? We have a therapy with a fascinating and sound theoretical mechanism, the mitochondrial boost via nitric oxide release, some promising, highly targeted uses, but a huge history of overselling, catastrophic criminal fraud, and, critically, very limited institutional buy-in from major medical payers.
It means that photobiomodulation is a technology that demands critical thinking. It is caught in this tension between a strong basic science foundation and these huge clinical application hurdles. It's primarily related to dosage complexity, that hormesis curve, and a long history of poor, non-standardized research protocols that have eroded trust.
So what's the path forward?
For PBM to move into the mainstream, it needs standardized, large-scale clinical trials that precisely define the dose and the wavelengths for every single claim.
We've taken a truly deep dive today, moving from the Grothes-Draper law defining the power of light, all the way through Andre Mester's happy accident finding hair regrowth on mice, to the crucial understanding of that narrow therapeutic window governed by hormesis.
It's a lot to cover.
It is, and the tension is clear. PBM is rooted in real photochemical principles. It boasts a few areas of tentative promise, hair loss, specific joint pain, but its generalized application remains highly scrutinized due to mixed research quality and a history tainted by extreme fraudulent marketing.
So the synthesis point for you, the learner, is absolute precision. Not all light therapy is equal. You have to ask about the specific wavelength. Is it red? Is it NIR? You have to ask about the delivered dose, the fluence, and the precise application area.
And reject any device.
Reject any device that conflates FDA clearance with FDA approval for broad claims. PBM is the science of hitting a specific target inside a cell, and if the light is off by even a small amount, the entire effect is negated, or worse, potentially harmful.
It seems like the difference between LLLT being a fringe treatment and a mainstream medical tool hinges entirely on controlling that light to hit the target with perfect precision.
It does. Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the action spectrum for tissue regeneration consists of more than one wavelength, as some emerging research into cellular signaling suggests, does this mean that the future of successful photobiomodulation lies not in a single monochromatic laser, but in complex, multi-wavelength light cocktails tailored precisely to an individual patient's biology and their specific cellular needs?
Something to ponder as you critically evaluate the next red light panel ad you see. Until next time, keep digging.